Episode 30 of the Bmoney Beastin podcast. I am here with Ray Yagloski. Did I say that correctly?
Yes, that's correct.
I've been saying Yagloski almost every time I mention, because I mention you a lot on the podcast, right?
Nice.
And I'm like, I always listen to this guy. He's really smart, and he's got some great ideas on nutrition and things like that. So to introduce you, you have an amazing, way of, I guess, passing along information and you connect to almost everybody. You got a way of doing it where it connects to a younger audience, an older audience. Everybody would kind of want to stop and see what you have to say. So he's got a great following on social media. He's passing along basically nutritional tips, correct? In weight training and things like that.
Yep.
So let's just start from the beginning, man. How'd you get, tell us about your time, how'd you get into the sport, things like that. Tell us about you, man.
Sure. My introduction to the sport was early in 9th grade. So my freshman year of high school, which is a late starter for sport of wrestling. You see a lot of kids being there ever since they were 5 years old, but my start was a little bit later. And I had played a lot of different sports growing up: baseball, basketball, soccer. That's what my friends were doing. And I loved playing all those sports. But when it came time for my freshman year, I put a lot of effort into soccer. I did all these travel teams. And my freshman year, we were 1-13. And I was so disappointed. I was like, come on, I'm running around this field. I'm not making the impact that I want to make. And I came to my dad, who had wrestled in college, and I told him, this year I want to wrestle. And he told me, he's like, well, okay, if you're going to do this, we got to do it the right way. And he knew that I was super competitive, a very fiery kid, upset when I lose. And he told me, he's like, you're going to have to learn how to respond to losses because nobody else is going to be out there with you. And so I said, okay, I can do it. And I joined wrestling my freshman year and became obsessed, loved it ever since because I had full control and I determined the outcome. I couldn't point fingers at anybody else and it was all on me. So I could work as hard as I wanted. And ultimately, it was my responsibility to get the job done. And so I really loved that pressure and that responsibility, even when I started wrestling, and just fell in love with the sport. Obviously, you get some bumps and bruises along the way, but wrestling, it teaches you so much. It gives you such an opportunity to be a better person, a tougher person, and that's what drew me into it.
Dude, you see, and I've had this discussion with other people, like you said, 9th grade. I even interviewed Michael Keefe here a while back, which I've known him a long time. He's from my area. He didn't start wrestling until 9th grade, and he ended up at Chattanooga, and he placed 5th at the NCAAs, which is like a mind-blowing, that never happens kind of thing. And I kept telling him, I was like, dude, that needs to be a movie, bro, because that'll never happen again. But, different people start and everybody takes something different from this, right? But people start and kids start at different ages, right? And sometimes you got a kid that starts when he's 6 years old and he can handle, X amount of matches for, 15 years or whatever it is till he's through college or whatever. And then you got kids that start at 6 and quit after 9. And then you got kids that start at, 14, 15 and can pick it up really fast. So I really feel like there's something to be said on the back end, right? We have a buddy, Bryson, my son, his best buddy. He lives down the road here. He didn't start wrestling until I think he was 10 or 11. And now his dad was an All-American, 4-time All-American at Iowa State, right? So I think he felt like he kind of had, okay, we can have the front end or the back end. So I felt like he did a good job by knowing, how he was raised, how he went through. We want this to be good on the back end. And, this past spring, that kid placed 3rd at NHSCA. Nice. He came a long way in a short period of time. So I think I see you talking to people and answering questions and things. Is it too late? I don't think it's ever too late, right? I think that, you have to have some sense of athletic ability and body control, right? I think if you have that, I think you can pick it up reasonably quick. But at the same time, there are going to be guys that have 50,000 reps, right? So
Yeah, sure.
so it's kind of a give and take, and you have to manage expectations and things like that.
Yeah, I think that question I get all the time because I think kids are just kind of searching for information on TikTok or whatever other social media, and then they come across my videos where I answer that question. And yeah, I just try to encourage them to join the sport, but also manage their expectations because, like you said, there's an experienced kid out there that deserves to win. He's been doing the work for such a long period of time, and you can rapidly improve. It's just that you got to have an open mind on like how quickly you're going to win matches. And so I think people go into it with some unreasonable expectations, like I'll snap my fingers and I'll be amazing. But as long as you're not thinking too much like that and you're willing to be terrible in the beginning, then I think you can get better every single day. And if you're a good athlete, pick this stuff up. So yeah, I love getting kids in the sport. That's the main thing.
Yeah, man, it puts kids on a path, which and I'm not just saying wrestling on this, like anything. If you
Yeah.
get kids into something, like you put them on a path. I feel like sports in general, regardless what sport it is, can help kids develop into good adults and responsible people.
Yeah,
Um, you,
absolutely.
you were just saying that. You know, when it comes to kids that do this for a long period of time, and most of them, if they don't burn out, right, like towards the back end of like their career, right, like right now, like we're having a tough time. Bryson's been doing this since he was what 5 or 6, right, and he's kind of hit a wall here in ninth grade, and we're kind of hoping that he can. He can, rebound from it or whatever. But if not, it's what it is, right? Some kids can keep going, some kids can't. Most of those kids, though, you see going, Division 1, Division 2, whatever. But there is something, like I said, to be said for just getting kids on a path, and I think you're doing an amazing job with trying to get kids to have a positive outlook. That's what I was trying to get to, like a
Yeah, for sure.
positive outlook on, hey, maybe this doesn't go the way I want it to go,
Yep,
but I can take every day. And it's just like anything else, like a job, right? Like,
absolutely.
like, hey, when you get a job one day, you're not going to be the best at it when you first start, but you could be the best at it, like month later, 3 months later, 6 months later, you're going to improve. So I'm curious, man. So from there, like, I know you're from the state of Pennsylvania, which is like the hotbed of amateur wrestling. Where are you now? How did you get there? And how did you get into this social media thing that you're in?
Yeah. Yeah, Pennsylvania, great home to get into wrestling. I was very fortunate. I had 4 Division 1 wrestlers as high school coaches. That really helped my development in wrestling, and they gave me all their best tips right away. So it helped me a lot because I was very confident that I was getting great information. But then over time, I went to college, did Division 3 wrestling at Johns Hopkins University, which is still on the East Coast in Maryland. And then after college, I did a rotational program for my job, my full-time job, which is in chemical engineering. And I moved out to a few different sites with that job, and I ended up lastly in Oregon and far from Pennsylvania, but ended up out in Oregon. And the first thing that I did, this was a few years after college, was get in touch with the local high school. I researched a couple newspapers and figured out which of the local teams was pretty decent. And just so happened that there were a set of brothers that were doing really well at the local high school, and they were smaller guys at the time. And I contacted the school. The head coach messaged me, and he said, "Hey, you want to come to wrestling practice on Sunday?" And so he picked me up in his van, and he had 5 wrestling boys in there and a dog and his wife, and we went up to the club practice here locally in Oregon, and the rest was history. We ended up taking the nucleus of the team, which was those brothers and a bunch of their friends, and ended up having an amazing high school wrestling dynasty where we won 4 team state titles and coached over 40 individual state champions. So it was really a awesome stretch. I just got lucky and landed in a wrestling town on the West Coast, which you don't really hear much about. And it was kind of just this perfect timing. You don't foresee these kind of things landing in your lap, but sometimes they develop for you and you get lucky. So that was what happened and how that ended up happening.
Dude, that's awesome, man. Do you enjoy it out west compared to where you grew up?
Yeah, I was in different stages of my life, so it's hard to tell exactly, what the differences are. But I like to think of Oregon as a little bit more beautiful version of Pennsylvania, because there's the evergreens and the mountains. They're really beautiful. Pennsylvania gets cold and there all the leaves fall down, so it gets kind of gray out there. But yeah, I love both places. They provide a lot of good stuff, and I liked growing up in Pennsylvania. I lived in a rural area, so both have their good qualities for sure.
I grew up in, and I'm still down here in North Georgia. Um, I keep telling people I'm like a misplaced Yankee because
Yeah.
my dad. Now, if you ask my dad, he says I'm a Southerner. I was below the Mason-Dixon line, but he's from West Virginia, like up there in like the mountains of West Virginia. My mom was from Ohio. So like I got like these Yankee qualities, and I was born in the South and raised down here. So dude, I'm 9 kinds of messed up in that regard. Like the only thing I don't say, when you were growing up, did you say pop? I'm just curious. Did you say pop?
No, no, I don't think so. No, not where I
You know
grew
what
up.
I'm talking about, though, right? Like you
Yeah.
go to restaurants. The first time I ever heard that, I went up. I was like 9. I went to Ohio to hunt one time with a cousin of mine up in Ohio. I was like 8 or 9, 10, whatever it was, and I'm sitting at this diner, and this woman comes up to me and she goes, "Hey, what kind of pop do you want?" I had no idea what she was talking about. And for anybody listening, that's a soda in the north.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, man, like compared to, I've been to Pennsylvania a handful of times. We went up there, I want to say 2 summers ago to Oaks, Pennsylvania. Oaks, they had 14U national duels up there. We spent about 4 or 5 days up there. Went down in Philadelphia, which I thought was a dirty city, in my opinion. It was not for me. I was like, this is not my place, even though I like the Eagles. So,
Sure.
whatever that is. But it was in the outskirts of like the big city, right? Like Pennsylvania was a beautiful state. And I got to see like some Amish areas I thought was really cool.
Yeah.
Like I've never seen anything like that. And I was like, that's pretty cool. And then you kind of compare where you're from, like to different areas of the country. Now, I've never been on the West Coast. The furthest west I've ever been is into Texas or Oklahoma. I think Oklahoma, whatever's furthest. And, I've always trying to compare though, so like from here to like where we're from to Pennsylvania, like there's a lot of like undeveloped land, I feel like, in the state of Pennsylvania, where like here, if there's undeveloped property, they're throwing condos on it, or they're putting, a gas station, or like it's very congested to where I felt in Pennsylvania, like there was a lot of, stretches of property. And I thought that was a really cool thing, like that they're not stacking things on top of each other. So I really like that aspect.
Yeah. Pennsylvania is a very rural place, and it's pretty spread out outside the 2 cities like Philadelphia, Pittsburgh. So you'll see a lot of farming land, a lot of space, a lot of hunting, fishing, those kind of things. And so, yeah, rural type of place. It breeds a lot of tough wrestlers because of that.
What do you think is the reason that the state of Pennsylvania is like the mecca of?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this for quite a while. And my current running theory is because of the number of colleges that have wrestling in the state of Pennsylvania and other states. If you look at the numbers, I'd have to really dive into the numbers and how they compare. But I believe that right now Pennsylvania has 10 Division I programs and something like 17 college wrestling programs. So you can imagine you take all those wrestlers that are on those great teams learning from their high-level coaches, and you throw them into middle schools and high schools and their dads of youth programs. And now you've got that concentration of wrestling coaches spread out with all this high-level experience, this exposure to the best wrestling coaches, these Division I coaches. And then they're your local coaches. They're next to each other in a town. And now these two juggernaut powerhouse programs are going against each other. A simple example with my town, like I said, we had 4 Division I former wrestlers, and they were teaching the middle school team and then the high school team, and we were just an average team. Down the street is Wyoming Seminary, and down an hour away is Easton, Pennsylvania, Northampton, all these amazing programs that we would meet up for the regional. And it's like just this concentration of wrestling knowledge. And then that breeds competition. And then I believe that really accelerates the learning curve and just the wrestling in the area. So that's kind of my current running theory. And I think that's why a lot of states that don't have a college team, out here in Oregon, we only have just one. And that kind of hurts the development and the advancement of a state, I believe. And so I'm a big proponent of having those college teams out there because those wrestlers want to give back. A lot of wrestlers, they get into the sport, they're into it their whole life as a competitor, and then they want to share what they learned. I was just on a text thread with our local team that I help with, and we've got 8 different coaches that want to raise their hand, volunteer to the team, and help these kids out. So that's the kind of stuff that makes an area better and can elevate the kids, because wrestling needs so much individual attention, to learn the techniques, to learn the skills of the sport. So that's kind of my running theory right now. The concentration of colleges in a certain state kind of spreads the area out, and then it really breeds the competition.
Man, I'll tell you, I've kind of argued here over the past, several months. The state, I'm in Georgia, and if you look at the tri-state area where I'm at, so that would be Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, right? Tennessee's always been even at a youth level through high school, very top heavy. So you'll have say, what are there? 14 high school weights, right? So out of the 14 high school weights, there'll be 9 weights that who's going to win the state championship, right?
Yeah.
The top heavy. Then you go down into Alabama and you kind of see it them jump, I guess is the best way to put it. You'll have maybe a couple kids in each weight, and maybe out of the 14 you'll have 7 that have a handful, and they'll year to year one might jump the other. Does that make sense? Kind of
yeah,
that.
Sure.
And then down in Georgia, growing up, and I can compare it because I've seen both sides. In youth, real small youth, 6, 7, 8 years old, we wrestled Tennessee AAU, right? Because we lived right on the line, and it was very top heavy, right? There was 1 or 2 kids, and then everybody else. And then when we got down, they made a ruling, I think I don't know, it's 6, 7 years ago now, where a lot of the parents in the Nashville area and things were upset that Georgia kids and Mississippi at the time didn't even have a high school state tournament, right? Wow. They didn't have anything. So all the Mississippi kids that wrestled, on that Memphis kind of end of the state, or I guess it's Memphis, right? Yeah, somewhere over there. They would jump over into Tennessee to wrestle, tournaments and state tournaments and whatever. Well, I guess a lot of parents, and I guess from what I was told was in the Nashville area, was upset that these out-of-state kids, because they were all technically out-of-state kids, right? Even if it's, 15 miles or whatever. They were coming in and winning state championships, and it was making parents upset and whatever. Well, so they made this rule, and you have to have an address.
Right now.
You got me?
Yep.
All right. All the parents in the state of Tennessee were kind of upset. These out-of-state kids are coming in and winning our state titles. Well, we were part of that, and because we lived in North Georgia, so it was like in the middle of like the season, the U season, and they're like, okay, no out-of-state kids can come in. So then we're trying to figure out Georgia, right? Because we lived in Georgia. And I think when Bryson was like 9 was the only year we didn't go to a state tournament because we didn't even know where to start, right? Because we'd never been down there. And finally we figured that out. And then we figured out, man, like the state of Georgia, and you'll see it in the next couple of years, like I feel like in our area, the tri-state area, the state of Georgia is deeper than any other state. Like you would go to these open tournaments, and there's probably 5 or 6 kids out of 20 that could win it, right? Like at any given weekend. So it was a lot more depth in Georgia than there was like top heavy Tennessee and then a few here in Alabama. Now, saying that, 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, whatever it was, the 14U team placed 8th from Georgia. Tennessee placed, I want to say, 11th at freestyle duels. And then I want to say Alabama was somewhere around 17th. All right. Mm-hmm. Now, Florida was up there too. So we can mention Florida. I think they were like 11th or something, 12th. So the South teams are kind of, there. And then the next year, almost the same team, the cadet team, placed 8th, right? Mm-hmm. So you start looking at that, and you start looking at kids from down in the South that are either placing or coming close at Fargo, things like that. I feel like the South is getting better. Now, the reason I feel like that is, especially in our state, to give you like a little history lesson, in the early mid-90s, I want to say, Arturo Holmes, he's from Virginia. He opened up the first training center in the state of Georgia. It was called the Wrestling Center, and it was in this big garage in the middle of like the outskirts of Atlanta. And you had kids from all over the state, driving an hour, 2 hours to go to camps and things at the Wrestling Center. Well, as time went on, all these kids that he put into college are graduating college, and then they're opening their own clubs back in their own areas, right?
Yeah, yep.
So now, granted, we don't have a Division I program in the state. We have NAIA programs. Life University is one that NAIA National Championship like 3 years ago. Grandview's won like 15 in a row or something. The one that snapped their streak was Life down here.
Okay, cool.
And that was in 2021. So, and I would say the bulk of those kids, I don't know this for a fact, but the bulk of those kids had to be from the state of Georgia, because you're talking about, NAIA schools are expensive. And trying to, talking about in-state tuition and things, I'd say the bulk of them were. And, of course, you might have a transfer or two, whatever. But then, we got Reinhardt, who's been they're about 2 hours, maybe an hour and 40 for me, in a little town called Waleska. Actually, that town reminds me of Pennsylvania, streams and, nothing. Beautiful. Yeah. But the guy they hired for that, Jeff Bedard, he's been a wrestling staple in the state for a long time, and he took that program as an upstart, and they've placed like top 5 almost every year for the past. They've been a program now 7 years maybe, so they're competitive, and I know that a lot of those kids are in-state kids. I've always said though that if the University of Georgia or Georgia Tech or one of these Division I schools ever had a Division I program, I agree with what you're saying. I think that would help. I think because, like I guarantee you up in PA, right, those college coaches are in constant contact with high school coaches.
Yeah, sure.
Right? Like, hey, this is what we're doing. This is how we're doing things. Plus, I feel like there's like it's bred into you guys up there.
Yeah.
That this is what you do. Me personally, I didn't even know what wrestling was until I was in the 6th grade, right? So it's a difference in, up north, like this is just what we do, compared to here, like, what is this? Okay. See, I thought, and my son did too. He's like, so I'm getting a mask and like a cool name.
Yeah, professional wrestling. Yeah.
So and I thought the same thing. I'm like, dude, I'm gonna be like The Rock. And,
yeah. Yeah.
So I think it's just a difference in culture, right? And I think that down here we're starting to get that culture. There are parents that wrestled that, their kids are wrestling, and maybe their kids are going to. So I think it's starting to kind of roll that direction. But also, the opportunities here are probably not as we do have them, right? Like up in Chattanooga, the Minion Club opened up at UTC, which that's our only Division I program, right? For outside of the Carolinas, that's it, right? In that tri-state area. So, they opened up a club, and then you got like Grindhouse down in Dalton, which is a pretty good club. I'm actually repping their hat. And then you got like high schools, like Cleveland High Schools won 11 straight state championships up in Tennessee. Their youth club's really good. They run it year round. They into a freestyle Greco program. Everybody's like, why do they win? Well, they never stop, right? So, so like there are opportunities in our area, and there's a lot of little youth clubs and things, but it's not quite to the level of Pennsylvania where you can throw a rock and find like an elite wrestling club, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like that's a bigger point here to me anyway, that up there you can, dude, I see it all the time on Facebook. There's these clubs I've never heard of, and they got 70 kids in there, and they're talking about, well, this kid plays fifth at Super 32, and this kid, and I'm like, who are these people?
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. I mean, the access to the high-level coaches and everything, that's been a huge advantage for Pennsylvania wrestling. But now what I'm seeing take the top of the high school wrestling to a new level, these guys that are placing at these senior level tournaments or college tournaments, it seems like the value of the internet, access to information, the knowledge is getting even broader, right? You have your own coach and they have a limited amount of information, but now with the access, this has been going on for a decade, 15 years, something like that, where you could get these tapes, you could get video, you can watch every single match you could find on the internet. Like you're able to get the knowledge and the information in such a more diverse way and a broader way. I think that's really helpful for the kids that are in the areas that might not have these high-level coaches. I mean, if a coach just goes and studies those tapes or those matches, they can get their wrestling knowledge to such a high level. I mean, that's such a cool thing that we now have in the sport. If you have the desire, you want to learn, the information's out there.
Dude, yeah, like it's funny you said that, because I was going to ask you right now, if you were walking down the street and you ran into somebody, walking into a AAU club or whatever, right? You're walking in, you don't know this person. I guarantee you they know who Bo Bassett is.
Yeah.
Okay.
For sure.
Him, I'm going to name out a few names here that I'm impressed with how they market. Bo Bassett is marketing himself in such a way. Granted, he wins everything, right? Yeah,
that's huge. That's a big part of.
Yeah, like he's won everything. Like I can't tell you, the last time I think he lost was to Cepeda, right? At that, who's number one? Like
1 year ago or so. Yeah,
and then he lost to, I think he got third at like a college tournament or something. But like in general, he wins everything. So he is the top kid in the country. He is, without a doubt, pound for pound. But he markets himself so well that he's likable. And I feel like him and Muggsy.
Yeah, sure.
Does a great job with, and because he's relatable. I feel like that's like half the battle, right? The ones that are putting out content in the amateur wrestling space that are relatable to the everyday person.
Yeah.
And I'll say this, like if you look at Bo Bassett, I've seen videos where he's like pushing a wheelbarrow around his neighborhood, right?
Yeah, I saw that one. Yeah.
That's as blue collar as you can get, man. So like I'm just using that as an example, and then you got Muggsy over here who's putting out videos where he either dropped out of high school or college or wherever it was, and he's working in a factory and he's like stacking lumber or whatever it was. That's relatable.
Yeah,
right?
That's cool. Yeah.
So I feel like the more people that, and here's the thing, Muggsy will tell you, I never wrestled Division I, and he just wrestled Caden Henschel, and it didn't look good. It really didn't. But he's a relatable person, and it didn't matter if he won or lost. I feel like there's more people that are relatable, and I'll fit you in that category too, right? Because you're very open about, hey, I started this late, I had my struggles. I think that draws people in like kids, right? Because like that's the thing, you want to put kids on a path. That's the whole goal of this whole thing.
Yeah.
So I think that draws kids in. Like I just seen a video from last night during the Mike Tyson fight. That was, dude. I want to ask you about that in just a second. I'm curious of your thoughts.
Sure.
Of them holding up signs at the Oklahoma State door of Bo Bassett's head, right?
Oh,
like,
interesting.
So I was like, dude, I think it was at the Oklahoma State door. I'm almost certain. But I was like, dude, he's got like such a reach now, and little kids will see that and be like, dude, I want to try to do what Bo Bassett does. And say there's 10,000 kids that enter and you keep 1,000 of them. You got 1,000 kids into the sport that's going to help the sport later. So I think that's a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, just to speak on that, we didn't touch on like how I got started with social media, but just to kind of go off what you just said, authenticity, a lot of people can see when you're posting or when you're talking, and especially on longer stuff like this where you're just having a conversation, or if I go out in public and I meet a wrestler and they're talking to me, I just try to show them like I'm just a person, right? Like the authenticity side of the content is so important, because ultimately you're not going to be burned out because you're just being yourself and you're just interested in A, B, and C. You know, I found my little area on the corner of the internet because of the things that I enjoyed and I was good at when I was in wrestling. And so that's why I try to bring that unique view to the table, rather than say like, oh, you know, my record versus, you know, Jason Nolf. Jason Nolf is the 3-time NCAA champion. Like, you should go to him for the wrestling technique and go to his page for all that stuff. And he brings his own flavor and humor and stuff like that. So I think that authenticity can bring different people into the sport and encourage them, and just, you know, keep this whole thing going. It's great to see so many different people posting about wrestling, because you get a little broader view of what it's like, rather than, you know, your own little experience in your wrestling room. So I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I do want to know, like, what possessed you to start passing this stuff along, these nutritional weightlifting, you know, these tips you met. At what individual point did you say, hey, I want to pass this to more people? I think this could be helpful. Like, where did this come from?
Yeah, so I was in a transition period where I was coaching in person at a gym, a fitness gym, group classes, and I had done that for over 5 years, and I started to get more confidence about what I had to say, and through my own experiences of training people, where I could step into more internet space. And so that's what got me motivated to do it. Is I have some unique experiences with coaching fitness and nutrition, and I also have a wrestling background. And at the time, I didn't really see a whole lot of people talking about that intersection, and it's something that I enjoy talking about, and that's what motivated me to do it and reach more people. I felt like it was kind of a unique area where I could influence wrestlers to be two things. One is healthier and think like long term, and then also just being better overall, right? That's what two of the main themes that I try to focus on is just getting healthier and understanding that just getting better, no matter what level you're at, whether you're elite or whether you're just starting out, that's kind of the main goal. Is what are the areas I can improve? Because at the end of the day, the biggest thing is I'm going to end my wrestling career and I'm going to have these character traits. I'm going to be this type of person that acts like X, and I want to be a better person for that. And that's one of the things that I loved about wrestling. It's taught me so much about getting over the obstacles in these little moments, dealing with, you know, sickness and injuries and losses. All these kind of things are just there. It's like a built-in, like, personal growth sport. It's just amazing in that way. And I want to be able to kind of have kids understand that, because they're just focused on winning their match, and it's kind of today's goal. But at the end of the day, we're all, you know, going to move on to other things, and we can use wrestling to improve upon that. And that's something that really gets me excited.
Man, I agree with you 100%, dude. Like, I've said this numerous times. You got the top of the top of the top, which is like the one of the one that's gonna make the world team and whatever. And you got outside, and you look at it. What is it like? Less than 2% of high school kids wrestle in college on any level, right?
Yeah.
Like, so it's a very small. But everybody that I've never met somebody who wrestled that was just a terrible person, right? They all have like unique qualities about them. Some of them are quirky, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But like they're all unique and honorable people. And I think there's something to be said for that. And I agree with what you're saying, because like everybody's going to move on and do different jobs and things like that. They're going to have kids of their own, and they may decide, hey, I want to help my kid be the best he can be. But then that goes into the crazy dad category, I feel like.
Sure.
But, at the same time, and now that we're on the crazy dad theory, Weston Richmond told me, he said, man, he just had a baby. He was episode 29, and we were talking. His son, I think, is 4 months old, something like that. And I asked him, I said, what are you going to do with your son? I've always, you wrestled Division I, you wrestled your whole life. He trained under Askren up there in Wisconsin. And he said, man, he goes, when he's like 4 or 5, I'll put him in like gymnastics, let him kind of learn, his body, how his body works. And then he said, dude, here's the thing, man. He goes, if he wants to do it, cool. If he don't, whatever. So I felt, and I told him, I was like, dude, that's a very healthy outlook on this, because something that always bothered me, and I was guilty of it at times. Looking back on it, I wish I hadn't have been. But there was like one season, man, with my son particularly, where he wrestled like 160 matches. He was he was like 10, right? And he cut weight every weekend. Like by the time and I remember this year very vividly. Like in Georgia, there's like these Battle of the Belt tournaments they used to do. I don't think they do them anymore. They call it something else now, but like you had to get the most points at the end of the year. They give you a belt or whatever. And he was killing it, dude. Like I think he won one, and he was like 1 point off of winning two, right? In two different weights. And he had like a good year, I think, whatever. I think he lost like 6 matches all year, 8 or something. Wow. And we get to the state tournament that year. And this is when we figured out Georgia and where to go for all that, And he's in a bracket, and everybody in the bracket he'd already beat like a couple times all year. And I'm like, dude, you're going to win state. He gets in the semifinals. He gets beat 6-3 by a kid he beat like 3 or 4 times that year. And he throws his headgear. It hits a lady. It's like 80 years old in the face.
Oh, no.
Dude, it was brutal. Like he threw it, and it hit this woman like, bam, right like in between her eyes. And his coach jerked him up. I was up in the stands. Jerked him up, took him to the back, calmed him down, whatever. He wrestled back for 3rd or whatever. And then on the way home, I was like, dude, what happened? Like, you just went out and just kind of went through the motions. He goes, dude, I want it to be over.
Oh.
Like, it was so much for so long, starting at the end of October into like early March.
Yeah.
On a 10-year-old kid, that by the time we got to that point, when I was like, oh, dude, he'll be peaking, really, he had already hit his peak and was coming down. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
So I felt like there's definitely something to be said for, longevity and, like Weston's idea. He's like, man, if he wants to do it, we'll do it. If he doesn't, we won't. I think that's very healthy, because at the end of the day, we're all competitive people, right? Like we want, like in general, like if me and you were going after a job together, like I'm not going to do anything unethical, but I'm going to do everything I can to out-prepare you the same way you would me, right?
Yeah.
Well, in general, as human beings, we're very like competitive.
Yeah.
But then when you're in a situation, and I think this is an interesting dynamic, at the end of the day, and I'm saying this to all like dads, moms, parents, grandparents, that's your family, and they should matter first, and whatever they accomplish is a secondary thing.
Yeah.
And I've seen, and I think that's what wears out a lot of kids is, they wrestle so many matches and cut so much weight for so long, like coming up, that by the time they get to where it matters, a lot of them are done, right?
Yeah.
And so I like your theory, and the reason I told you that was your theory where you're talking about. I heard you say, like, okay, I weigh 148. I need to make whatever it is. I'm just making up. I've read a few of those.
Yeah.
When you got high school kids, and high school in general, if you've wrestled for a long time, you're going to have about, say you wrestle 60 matches, 8 of those are going to be tough, right? In general, like, you know what I'm saying? Like in general, at least down here, up in PA, it's probably a tough weekend every week. But so you look at that and you're looking, okay, I got to weigh in 60 times in 3 months. These kids that are cutting from, I'm just making this up, 125 to 106.
Yeah.
Right. For 3 months. I agree completely with your theory of, hey, man, you're within 5 pounds, clean up your diet, go here. You're going to feel better. And nobody talks about these things, right? And that's why I love what you do. Like, nobody talks about blood sugar levels dropping out. Nobody talks about, like, you were talking about overall better product. Well, if you feel better, you're going to wrestle better.
For sure.
So what are your thoughts on, and I was leading to this, what are your thoughts? You got a lot of parents and a lot of kids that will cut away from somebody or, cut because they think I can't win if I don't cut weight, right? But then before I finish, Steve O'Poland is I think he's at somewhere in Colorado.
Northern Colorado, yeah.
He started, I think, at NC State, but I remember when he was in high school, he wrestled 106 at Super 32, and he won it. And he showed a video where he literally weighed in at like 104, right, in the high school division. And he put true 106. And, dude, that should have showed a lot of kids in itself that, this weight cutting, like extreme weight cutting, like culture we're in is it's just the way it's been. So I think people just think, hey, we got to do this, right? What do you say to kids and people about, I can't compete if I don't cut extreme amounts of weight? What is your response to that? Yeah,
there's a balance here because weight cutting has been proven to help some competitiveness, right? And so it's a tough argument to say, hey, if we zoom out here and we think about your wrestling career as a whole and your experience in wrestling, if you take that zoomed out approach and you think long term, the healthier you are, the more energy you have, the more excited you are for practice, the less you're focusing on weight cutting, and the more you're going to enjoy the sport. And ultimately, the more you're going to want to train, the more you're going to want to do tournaments. And it just kind of compounds in that direction. Whereas I don't know the numbers on this, but if an athlete is cutting weight over and over year after year, I have a high probability of having a burned out athlete, right? Or someone that's not enjoying their process. And ultimately, we want to be in this sport for long enough for us to see success. And that's where I think, being close to your weight class in terms of your health, which means being a lean athlete, being strong, those are the kind of competitive advantages that you can focus on in the long-term part of your wrestling that will go a long way to enjoying the sport. And then ultimately, through that enjoyment and through that training, you will do more wrestling. You'll like it. You'll be in the training room. You'll be excited, and you'll put more effort into the sport. And so that's kind of my philosophy. And also related to what I said earlier, I think that learning how to lose fat and learning how to get better at wrestling should be more of where our brain is focused on. What happens is weight cutting takes over our entire life. And, you'll have kids in school like, oh, I'm cutting weight, I can't do certain things with school, or they want to tell all their classmates. So there's some kind of badge of honor with weight cutting that is kind of in the culture, and it makes you feel a little bit tougher. And I know I felt that when I was in high school. So there is that element that is attractive to the kids. Like, oh, I'm a wrestler. Like, I cut weight, which, like I said, not necessarily the only path to getting us the results that we want. So it's multi-factors. I don't have like a very specific, like, yes, this athlete should cut weight or this athlete shouldn't. I try to take it in a context dependent, depends on their situation. There's a lot of factors at play. What's their experience level? Do they have the support around them, whether that's parents, coaches, and even like coaches outside of wrestling that know about nutrition and weight cutting and these kind of things? Is the tournament important to them? Like, is it a big deal to be at this perfect weight for this part of the season? Maybe, maybe not. These are all kind of things that I try to consider when I'm giving these recommendations. So, yeah, it's kind of a tough subject and a very interesting part of wrestling, the weight cutting. And to kind of go back to you about dodging certain athletes, my thought on that is if you zoom out and you look at some smaller states that aren't as competitive as, say, a deep state like Pennsylvania, you might take like a lower level Pennsylvania ranked guy and be able to come over to another state and he would just destroy everyone. So you're going to say like my wrestling is only judged on the title that I have, and that title that I have is only dependent on where I live. And that is just, to me, doesn't even represent the skill level and how good of a wrestler you are. And so I started realizing this when I was moving around to these different places. I my old coach used to call them like token state champs. You know, they just give them out. And so it's like you get being able to judge yourself on what's inside and what your skill level is, how you're getting better, rather than relying so much on I need to get this specific title. It's a great personal growth and something that I try to emphasize in my adult life and so on. I think that you kind of can focus more internally, and that can be a lot more satisfying, and you don't have to rely on getting a state championship or some kind of title to feel good about yourself. Because I really struggled with that. When I didn't win certain things, I was working super hard. It's frustrating when you don't get those rewards or those accolades. But at the end of the day, if you sit back and you look at the body of work that you did and all the training, that's what makes you unique and makes you a great person, not necessarily some title. And I think that that's really hard for people to remove themselves from. Even parents get sucked into this. So, yeah, it's a tough conversation and a tough perspective because everyone's chasing those results. But I think, having that process orientation is, the best way to go about it.
Man, it's funny you said token state titles, right? Like, you're completely right. You could take a mid to lower level PA kid and you could drop him in probably 47 other states, right? And I'm really just, well, we'll say 45, maybe pull out
sure.
Maybe pull out Illinois, California, New Jersey. But in general, he would probably steamroll his way to a state championship in almost any other state, right? Like, I don't know how PA set up, but in Georgia, there are 7 classifications.
Yeah, that was something that just popped into my head. The idea around like certain states will organize their tournaments way different, right? We got California with just 1. We got Pennsylvania has 2. Oregon, where I live, has 5. So there's like all these different divisions, and it's really hard to figure out, what makes sense. But yeah, that's a big consideration as well.
Yeah, like in 7 classes, and I've heard of 5 and 4, but like I remember when I was in high school, I want to say they only went to 5A, I think, yeah. But 7, there's 7 classifications. So every weight has 7 state champions every year in the state of Georgia. And I brought up how like there needs to be like a who's number 1 tournament at the end of the year. And then you get all these pushbacks. And now apparently Georgia Grappler, who does a good job, is looking into doing that. But at the same time, you look and the pushback is, well, you know, if it's going to be 2 weeks out, what's the weight allowance, right? You know, they've been cutting weight, you know. And then you got guys that will back out because, oh, well, I just won state. I don't want to lose, right? That'll happen. Yeah. And I was like, well, you got to look at it. You offer the state champs and then the best runner-up, right? Like, this was my opinion on it. So the best runner-up, say he wrestled a 2-1 match or a 3-1 match or whatever it is. All right, that's the best alternate. And then you keep going down the line for everybody that drops out, right? But there's really no way to show who is the top guy in the state, right? There's really not. That's the closest you could come. So I can see you're not going to get recruited in the state of Georgia off of a state championship.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you're just not. Now, in PA, you win a Pennsylvania state championship, you're going to get recruited.
For sure. Right?
And in Ohio, I'd say the same would be in Ohio, even though Marcus Blaze, who just got a big fat sack of cash from Penn State, man. And I want to get your opinion on that before I bring up the Mike Tyson fight that I want your opinion.
Okay.
What do you think of this NIL culture? Because I seen a post and I reshared it because it blew my mind, okay, that you got a high school kid that got offered $400,000 a year for 6 years at Ohio State, $2.45 million or whatever it was. What are your thoughts on this? Like, it's good that kids can make a living, but it's even in, you know, wrestling's a sport. Football's getting crazy. I just seen a quarterback from Louisiana that got offered like $15 million to go play at LSU. Whether, you know, it's like, this is getting a little out of hand. It's kind of eventually going to there's no pro league in wrestling, obviously, but like going into the NFL, major leagues, whatever, with these NIL deals, you got these kids that are getting these big bags of money, and there's multiple aspects here. They don't understand taxes, right? Like, dude, if you'd have gave me at 18 millions of dollars, dude, can you imagine? I'd have had Bugattis and like all kinds of crap I didn't need. They don't understand how to invest or manage money. There's so many, that's just two, but there's so many like aspects. You take a kid, never really had anything, you give him all this money and you expect him to perform at a high level. His mind's 1,000 miles away, right?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this, and how do you think it could be streamlined to be a better process?
Yeah, that's a good question. Before we go to that conversation, the one thing I wanted to mention was related to the state championships, and you got some kids in a smaller state that have all these divisions and they are a state champion, and the rest of their life they're going to be chest up, hey, I'm a state champion in wrestling and I'm a great wrestler, which is awesome. You know, that's one of the benefits of having all those divisions, and they had a really positive experience, and more people can have high levels of placement and success. Then you take someone in a tougher state, say California, they might not even made the state tournament, but if you just threw them into a different state, they would be amazing. Their skill level is awesome. But because of the state they're in, it was super competitive. They didn't make it very far. And they're walking with their head down and thinking, my wrestling career was a big waste of time. I sucked or something like that. And in reality, that kid over there could be better than the other kid that's in a different state. And so I think it just goes to show that you shouldn't just value, you know, where you're at in terms of placing. You should value yourself and what's inside, how hard you trained, and what skill level you brought to the table. So I think that that's something that can change people's mind around how far they made it in the sport. And I know that I had to do that for a long, long time to kind of see my experience a little differently. And it helped me get online and not be so, I didn't win like something, this special title. And so I think that will go a long way to helping kids kind of reframe their experience. But on the NIL side, yeah, it's pretty incredible. I think we're in kind of this new territory where there's not a lot of rules. There's not a lot of clear guidance or what's going to happen with whether it's football. You've got this new revenue sharing situation that could be impacting certain schools and certain sports. I don't know what to think about it. I think can be a bit overwhelming if you're getting paid that much right out of high school. That seems to be a lot of pressure on these kids. But that's what they have done their whole life, is perform. So I think that the colleges are valuing these wrestlers at that level. Now it's interesting. I think from a business perspective, I'm always curious how this could work, right? You're going to pay an athlete that much, but where does the return on investment come into play? Is it when they go and they win this special tournament and win the NCAAs, win an Olympic title? We think that this high level recruit is going to pan out and get us the recognition for all that money, or is it just people that love the sport of wrestling are willing to put their money into the team or the college that they want to see do well? And I think it's probably more of that. And so that'll be interesting to see how that continues and if there's the support for that. We seem to be in this kind of wild time with what's going on. I don't even know what to make of it and what the future, might be. I don't think all the athletes are getting that much money, and the top level, like Marcus Blaze, probably Bo Bassett, these kind of guys are likely very, very sought after in terms of the value that they bring to a program. So they're going to see an outsized return compared to, just even your average Division I recruit. So yeah, I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how it develops. I don't have too much of an opinion on it quite yet, but I am interested to see how things start to change, and we'll see how competitive the landscape becomes, just throwing the money around. Yeah, you hear a lot of different numbers, especially with the transfers to, say, Iowa. They're getting a lot of recruits in, especially transfers. And then I think about Deion Sanders talks a lot about this, where he gets a lot of transfers, of course, because of his name. And he talks about, hey, you're getting a more developed, a more higher likelihood of success athlete if they've already played college. They've been established. You could just buy one of those off the shelf versus instead of relying on a 18-year-old high schooler that you don't know how they're going to pan out in college. They might come to college and get into all kinds of bad stuff, or they might not be mature enough to work hard on this rigorous Division I schedule. And so he's going out and he's getting a transfer that's killing it at a different school. And so it's interesting to kind of see the different approaches even across the sports. So yeah, I'm curious how this goes.
I'm kind of related to where you brought up, the amount of money that and what is the return on that.
Yeah,
it kind of reminds me of like the NFL draft, right? You ever watch the NFL draft?
Yeah,
dude, it's a crapshoot, man. It really is a crapshoot. If you look at it, every year for let's just say the past 5 years, right? Out of the first round quarterbacks, they've probably been 15 or 20 of them, right? There's probably 3 of them that are full-time starters, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just making up that number. I don't know if it's particularly perfect, but actually the other night I watched a quick little video on like the top 20 draft busts of all time, right? I found it really interesting. And one that stood out to me was Vernon Gholston. All right. He played at Ohio State. He was a defensive end. When the Jets drafted him, he ran like a 4.5. He weighed 280 pounds or whatever, like a ridiculous athlete. He spent 3 seasons or whatever in New York, and he didn't have any sacks. He was a sack machine in college. Yeah. But his contract, he had $18 million guaranteed. Okay.
Yeah.
$18 million. All right. So regardless whether they're successful or they're not, look at Jamarcus Russell. He's the biggest draft bust quarterback probably of all time, him or Ryan Leaf. But Russell was later on. And when he got $72 million guaranteed, and he was awful. Yeah. Awful. So I look at it like that's what this NIL thing's kind of being. Now, you did bring up an interesting concept with Deion Sanders. And he's like, well, I don't want the high school kids. I can get guys with playing experience that I can see. So I don't know if that's going to become a more and more prevalent thing in wrestling. It could be, right? But they got to get in somewhere. So how does that work? Do guys start coming in at these lower level D1 schools at some point, and then the top guys start buying them out? Is that what kind of starts happening?
Yeah,
Because
that's always interesting, the small school versus the big school type of thing. You got Andrew Alirez. He went back to Northern Colorado. That was a big and interesting situation where there was a lot of interest from other schools and he was entertaining those ideas, but he ultimately decided to stay with his home team. And I think a lot of lower schools, the smaller schools, they're going to have a harder time with that. And you see that with quarterbacks, right, that are doing well at these lower levels of football, and then boom, they got all this attention, and it is kind of like a potential path, which is take what you can get, dominate at the level you're at, and then boom, you can make a lot of money after that. And it's a pretty crazy environment to be in. And the thing that is unfortunate about that is the loyalty and the continuity of being with a program for 4, 5, 6 years, just continuously developing, because any of these sports, but especially wrestling, I really admire coaches that can take a mid-tier recruit and just build them up over time and then get them to be an All-American somewhere where they weren't projected, and increase their skill level, increase their wrestling ability. I really admire that level of coaching, just because I'm a coach myself. So it's cool to see those coaches take somebody where they're at and then boom, make them amazing. It's a little bit easier to take somebody that's already really established, really motivated, and really successful, and just have them continue that. All you have to do is just keep them in their lane, right? And just keep them going. Obviously, there's a lot of competition out there, but I really admire the coaches that can take that mid-tier guy and take him to the highest level. That's something that I really admire.
yeah, I think that's going to become less and less of a thing over time. And there's a lot of factors, right? You got when coaches sign on to be a head wrestling coach, especially in football, right? I think wrestling gets a little more of a pass, and that's even on a high school level, right? If you got a wrestling coach, hey, he's breathing, he knows how to run a half, yeah, let's leave him alone. Who cares? So, but in terms of football, you're talking about football, they got a short leash, right? You got to win. You got to win now. And yeah. I would say Penn State, Iowa State, Oklahoma State, top wrestling schools. If they're not producing, there's going to be a problem, right? So I feel like you get a pass at Chattanooga or Hofstra or whatever. Yeah. You kind of get a pass. But dude, I think that the development side, I think that in my mind, that's what would make sense. Outside of the Bo Bassett's, the Jacks Forrests, and those guys, Marcus Blaze, these top guys, I think everybody else to try to get to that are fringe top D1 guys. I think that's what is going to eventually be the route, right? I think they're going to sign on to these smaller schools because the bigger schools are loaded up with guys they've bought out. And I feel like as those guys graduate, right, they're going to reach down in this pool and start stripping these lower level schools. And I think, and when you were talking about revenue share, and then you've seen the max scholarship went from 9.9 to 30. Here's the thing. If you look, and I asked Rochelle at Chattanooga here a few months ago when that first come out, I said, dude, how is that a good thing for you? He says, dude, we can't compete with that financially. Yeah. Where Penn State and Oklahoma State and Ohio State, these teams can. We don't have the revenue that they have. So I said, well, how many kids you got in there right now? He goes, I don't know, 35. I said, and he said, they're all getting pieces, right?
Yeah, sure.
For the most part. So, it's one of those kind of things where it's cool to have that availability, but not all those schools can do that. So, so it's almost becoming an unfair playing field. And, now in college football, it's been interesting. Look at Vanderbilt this year. Jesus, dude, they beat Auburn and Alabama in the same season. Yeah. They should have beat Texas. They were beating Texas. So Vanderbilt hadn't been to a bowl game in like 10 years? They're going to go to their first bowl game. They built that new facility. They got a lot of boosters and donors. With these new rulings and things, they're bringing down their academic requirements. They're bringing in athletes, and they're paying them. Like their whole backfield is New Mexico State's backfield from a year ago. And they're beating SEC teams, like high-level SEC teams. So in certain aspects, but it goes back to boosters, right? Vanderbilt's got a huge following, right? Like a huge booster base. But then you go to like let's just make this up. Let's find a team. North Carolina probably doesn't have the base money financially that in football that Vanderbilt would have. I'm just making that up. So you're not seeing that as much like in certain ACC schools, but Miami does. Look at Miami right now, right? So it's going to become, I feel like, in this environment. Nick Saban mentioned it, I think, during his "I'm taking off" speech.
Yeah.
He's like, I don't agree with a lot of this, yada, yada. I think it's going to become very top heavy.
Yeah.
You're going to have like your top 20 programs, football, wrestling, basketball, whatever, and then everybody else. And I think, like you said, they're going to start cherry picking guys that they want over time. And that's unfortunate, for competition because, when it comes down to dollars and cents, that's not really competition.
Yeah.
You can't compete in recruiting. You can't, it makes it a different environment.
Yeah.
But man, this has been an awesome conversation, dude. We've hit some cool topics. We actually went longer than I thought we might, but brother, I've really enjoyed this, kind of getting to know you a little better. I've always admired what you do. Before we take off, man, tell people how they can get engaged with you and how they can, ask questions and get responses and things like that.
Yeah, I try to make my social media very accessible and be able to help kids on an individual level just through messages. But I'm on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, all these different platforms. And I try to post videos around off the mat fitness and nutrition tips because that's an area that I've studied a lot and enjoy learning about. And I also think it's an area that is not as talked about as other topics in wrestling. So these are the kind of things that I like to explore and share with young wrestlers because ultimately I want to be the kind of coach and the kind of influence that I wish I had when I was younger, trying to sort out all these different things and all these different tips. And so, you can find me. My handle and my name is Ray Yagloski, Yagloski. And look forward to connecting with everybody and answering questions and creating conversations just like you're doing with your podcast. So appreciate you having me on and get to talk about all these different topics. Wrestling, such a great sport, and looking forward to wrestling growing as a sport and having the kids that are in the sport enjoy it as much as they can, because ultimately they're going to be the future fans and the promoters of this sport. So I think that that's a big aspect of growing the sport is just getting those kids to have a great experience and be able to share out all the great experiences they had in wrestling.
I agree completely, man. That was very well said. Follow Ray Yagloski, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, all over the place. He got some great content. He can answer some awesome questions. If you're new, if you're not, if you just want to do things different, he's got answers. Great guy, great content. Thank you for being on with me, man. We've had a great time. Episode 30 of the Bmoney Beastin podcast is in the books.